Hi and welcome back to 90 Day Dental Day 16. We started off a few days ago with a smile design analysis and started with the first part of occlusion yesterday, and today we're going to be rounding that off and finishing off the topic, and Gary's going to get straight into it. Take it away.
The second part of occlusion is about occlusal design. And I apologize that it had to be in two parts, but you know, the 5 to 10 minute limit just sort of tied me up. So I hope that you will be willing to enjoy two segments. I'm going to call this one occlusal design, because this one is about how do you make teeth work against each other once you've kind of figured out what that patient has going on. It's kind of like, smile design with teeth, but now how do I make it work? I looked at what was there, how do I make that work? Here's what you have to think about in developing an occlusion. You have to look and say, what is there in intercuspal position, how they relate, end-to-end and crossover, pathways and patterns between ICP and crossover. So here are some components of a designed occlusion. There has to be a condyle disc appropriately positioned at whatever reference you pick. And my personal preference is going to be a fully seated condylar position, or what is called centric relation. And again, I'm going to reiterate that I don't like those words, because they carry a lot of baggage. For me, it's just the place that the condyles go to when there's no teeth involved, muscles fire, and it seats. It's a joint and it has a seated position. And you can pick the one you want. There are a number of them, and I've treated patients at all of them. The three I've worked with the most are centric relation, a fully seated condylar position, a muscle-mediated condylar position, that for me works in patients who have a joint that isn't normal, and at maximum intercuspal position, because for someone whose teeth are working and I don't have to interrupt their ability to find that same place, then I'd like to treat people at MIP. I love it. The second thing, posterior teeth have to touch simultaneously. So when you bite down, I don't want you running into any one tooth. Forces should be directed down the long axis of teeth. Front teeth should have slightly lighter contact. Some people like a little bit of clearance. I don't need them to hit quite as hard. Some people disagree with that. I just found that when I was doing equilibrations on people who asked me to do them, a lot of them came back and said, I'm banging my front teeth. And when I kind of took a rubber wheel and polished some of those contacts a little, they said, oh, that feels better. There was a little bit of freedom there. And I found they liked that. So I add that to my list. Under clench, neither jaw nor teeth deflect. So once you apply force, your jaw doesn't have to move to make the teeth fit together better. And no tooth has to move to make that happen. Okay? In movements away from that maximum intercuspal position, we're going to have some sort of guidance. Okay? Now, actually, what's interesting, and there's two kinds of guidance. There's anterior guidance and posterior guidance. The one we hear about is anterior. But here's the posterior determinant. This is going to determine the form of some teeth, because the posterior is the form of the eminence that the condyle has to move against. If it's steep, back teeth are going to separate quickly. They fly apart. If it's shallow, they're going to separate very slowly. In other words, if I move forward, okay, my mandible is going to move down and forward. Those teeth are going to come apart at some rate. If that angle is steep, they're going to fly apart. If it's slow, they're going to separate slowly. Where we really think about it is in this lateral movement, because the form of posterior teeth is going to be determined by what clearance is there. And if you've ever noticed on people who are class 2 who often have a shallower fossa and a shallower eminence, the teeth are often not very pointy. But in someone who has really pointy back teeth, if you go look, I promise you that those teeth are separated quickly because they have a steeper angle of the eminence. Posterior tooth form is designed to allow cusps to move through or past as they escape the occlusal table. That's what the grooves are there for. And that's a fixed determinant. I can't change that. The anterior guidance happens out on teeth. And technically, the anterior guidance is whatever happens ahead of the condyles. We talk about anterior guidance, and we like to design it on anterior teeth, just like you see here in this Posselt drawing. That is changeable. I can do some things to that. Okay? Why would you want to do that on anterior teeth? Well, it turns out back teeth can generate significantly larger bite forces. And so if we're going to keep contact, we'd like to have contact be in places where we can reduce that if we're restoring someone, if I'm going in and building something up, or if they're already destroying what they have. Is that what nature does? Well, Canine Guidance, multiple studies, 2 to 3% bilateral, 2.3% bilateral, 10.7 unilateral. Why don't we say 13% of the time you're going to have anterior guidance on anterior teeth? Okay, why do we do it in restorative dentistry? Well, that's because of this guy, Clyde Schuyler, who was a prostodontist in New York City. 1927, he wrote an article in the New York Journal, and he talked about making only front teeth hit. He gave a lecture in 27. He published it in 29, and what he said was, I'm building these giant reconstructions for people, because you think what you had to work with in 1929. You had perioprosthodontics and then gold and acrylic. So you were building roundhouse things. And what he said was, I found that if I would keep the contact on the anterior teeth and movements away from centric relation, that people were destroying their prostheses much less quickly. Okay, this is some of the literature from that, and if you wonder about that, you can email me. I'll be happy to send you some things. It's gdewood@speareducation.com. So if that occurs 13% of the time, what is nature doing the rest of the time? Well, it turns out they're doing group function. This is a study that was done by some friends about balanced guidance. Okay, these two guys, this is Ron Presswood and Andy Toy, and one of them is in Houston, one is in England, and they both are interested in this. And what they discovered is they went in and said, well, how do things relate, when it just sort of happens? And what they found was that a balanced occlusion is almost what always occurs. In other words, there's functional wear that occurs on teeth until they are at the angle of that eminence. And so everything touches if you live long enough. Now, why would we then design canine guidance? We do it for prosthetic convenience because it works. Lots of people tolerate it perfectly well, use it whenever the situation permits. Can you alter someone's envelope and give that to them? This is from a study by Lundin and Gibbs, and what they found was that they could take people with these three patterns, vertical, horizontal, and variable, and they could alter the envelope. Okay, and they found out that yes, you could get people to chew that way, the chewing envelope, the envelope of function. Patients will chew just fine. But the envelope of motion was a bigger question. Will they still move dysfunctionally in Bruch's? Can the neuromuscular envelope of motion be altered? That's the real question here. And they discovered, well, yes, it can, but it's not as predictable as saying it's going to work. 11 patients, this is Eckfeld and Carlson did a study. Severe broad pattern pathway end-to-end wear. They restored them with narrow patterns at 3 years. 6 of 11 were successful. There were 5 failures. Now, 5 failures is a lot. Here's what that tells me. If I'm designing a case where I'm rebuilding an occlusion, I'm going to try that. I still start out with canine guidance. In other words, anterior guidance and anterior teeth. What happens if it doesn't work? You're going to see stuff happen. Your provisionals will move or chip. You'll see wear patterns on them if you've hooked them all together. You're going to notice that things are happening. If that happens and you go in and say that doesn't seem to be working, what are you going to do? You shorten things. You decrease the overbite and increase the overjet. You create freedom up there so the patient can move around. In a mutually protected occlusion, which is how I always start my design, canines would be the guiding teeth. Guidance moves forward to the incisors as they slide out. I'm not going to use that when forces mandate assistance from other teeth. For instance, a canine pontic. Before we had implants, we had to do things like this. We made big roundhouses. When that person goes out into that movement toward where you see that line, that tooth back on the lower, on the left, your left side, the patient's right, is going to get pulled up, which means we have to distribute forces. Distributing force spreads it around an arch. If there's structural deficiency, I need to spread out the force. I wouldn't want to hang a canine on here and say, let's put all of our guidance on that. If there's not enough bone, so you get secondary occlusal trauma, in other words, you're getting movement, then I need to go in and say I need to do something to help that stabilize. People who are heavy bruxers and we can't manage the bruxism, in other words, they're bruxing and we're not able to know why. Today we think about a lot of things, including airway, but that doesn't mean that everybody stops when we figure out their airway. And bruxers, I know something because I've done it. If you give pointy canines to people who brux, what are you going to get? You get broken canines. Some patients require force distribution. Group function allows you to distribute that force. In a mutually protected occlusion, it keeps back teeth apart. But it can be mutually protected and still require lots of teeth to be in contact. Here's the components of a designed occlusion. If group function is appropriate, canines and bis are going to carry that to the centrals. I try to stay off of molars. Have I built it with molars? I have, but those are less predictable because of the forces they can generate back there. A working group function, and that one was a full group function, and in fact, let me go back to that one. Okay. If I go back to a full group function, what we would see is that I have contacts on both sides. A working group function, which is way more common, would include contacts on that working side. If canine guidance is appropriate, then you're not going to see posterior contacts as the patient moves. I for sure don't want balancing interferences. That means I don't want guidance where you see the purple on these teeth. That is high force generation. Now, in a group function, I might have to use that, but I would always include contact on the other side. The next component is lateral crossover supported by the anterior. So if I go all the way out to the side, I'm going to get on my front teeth. I don't want to be able to get molars hitting each other back there in this position because that's really hard to deal with. I want to be on front teeth. And then straight protrusive should be on both centrals. Ideally, mesial marginal ridges, the patient rides right up. I get that ideal doesn't happen all the time, but if you're creating it, I can do that. So here's my list of things that I want to do if I'm building an occlusion. Those are things that I try to make happen. How do you make it work in the mouth? Begin with the edge of the maxillary central incisors. Look at the lower anteriors. Make the front teeth work. If I look at this and say, how would I make that work? I'd look at lower anteriors and say, if I'm going to get those together end to end, some things probably have to change. I can look and say there's actually at least one tooth there that looks like it's sticking up out of the level, if you will. And I like to color those on. And then I sit down and I say, okay, let's put that back together. Let's make those front teeth work. Make any changes to the upper anteriors I want to make. Go down to the lower and then begin to adjust those in an end-to-end position. What you'll notice is that most of that point is gone already. We added some on the lateral and the central on that side. We're going to create a place, a landing area for those anterior teeth to come. And we're going to make it smooth because smooth is the most important thing. Can I move without applying much force? That removes energy from the system. The smoothness is as important as anything else. When I slide around, can I go over a step? I can, as long as when I come back, I don't run into something. If I was running into something here, what would I change? Well, I probably wouldn't change the upper because the upper is going to be designed to aesthetics. Let's change the angle of that lingual that is hitting on that tooth so that it wants to lift up out of there when force is applied. That reduces energy, takes it out of the system. Let's make it smooth. On the other side, you'll notice the crossover is very smooth. But on that side you just saw a moment ago, we had to work with that to get it to feel nice and smooth. People have places they can go lock up. If they can lock up, they can apply force. It's why we have to find a way to make it smooth. Imagine you have two marbles. If I shaved two flat spots on the marbles and put them together and said squeeze, you can squeeze how hard? Hard as you can. If, on the other hand, I take and I roll those around so the round edges are together and the flats are on your finger and your thumb and you now squeeze, what's going to happen? Bing, those fingers, those balloons, those marbles are going to fly out of there. That's what happens on teeth. We are able to have the teeth separate. So what we do is we redesign the contacts. In this case, a lot of bleaching happened, more than my taste, but people get to decide what aesthetics looks like. And now when this person goes to that same place and pushes, the teeth move, which means they can't apply the same force. Then make the back teeth work. Go in and give me dots. If you have total control, what do? I start on front teeth. I set those to aesthetics, or I wax them to aesthetics. I go to the lower anteriors. I design them aesthetically, and then I make the edges work against each other. Okay, we talked a little bit in smile design about front teeth position. In this case, let's take that aesthetic position and make them work against each other. Put the upper teeth where they go in that arch and then go ahead and add lower teeth to that. And now what you have is you have some teeth that can work against each other. If it's a natural dentition and you have to do that, here's the first point of contact for this patient in their arc of closure. It was a nice dot, but I have to adjust that dot until I have lots of dots, or I have to add in places where it allows me to make this happen. I want dots in the back and stripes in the front. That's a mutually protected occlusion. That's what I try to get from most of my patients until they show me it won't work. What if I want to equilibrate a natural dentition? Let me give you some steps. These are the rules I was taught. The Lubbock rule, lingual slides, you have to grind the you know the Lubbock rule. The muddle rule and the bull rule. The problem with those is that I can get all tied up in the rules, okay? And the rules aren't really telling me anything more than here's what I think is in the way. I would argue that if you could look at the tooth and ask yourself, what do I think is happening on that tooth, that you won't get tied up in trying to say, what is the rule for that contact? What does that tooth look like? What is the position of that tooth in that arch? Does it look like it belongs there? So I know that when I get to the need to change it, I'm not tied up in the rules. And for me, when I got it in the rules, I would often find myself stuck in this thing where it was like, I just don't get what is supposed to happen here. It all felt like bull. Grind the marks. Look at those marks. Maintain natural form. Adjust the tooth that'll be least affected. I like to have the patient grind in red and then tap in green, blue, or black because those colors cover red better. And I don't want to take away a contact at MIP that I want to leave there. Step 1, adjust end-to-end and crossover. Adjust so both centrals contact end-to-end and protrusive. you're going to get something like that. Move to extreme lateral protrusive excursions. Smooth out any catches. Let them move edge to edge nice and comfortably. Don't forget protrusive crossover. Let's bring them forward and make sure they can't grab that. Now create even posterior contacts in CR on all posterior teeth or whatever reference you've decided. Sometimes it's just tap, tap. Allow the patient to drive to that. You're not going to get the same thing you'd get on a drawing, but you're going to get dots everywhere. That's what we're after. When is step 2 completed? When all interferences to that arc of closure are eliminated, everything touches. Okay, there's ideal places for dots. You don't get those. I stop when the cuspids hit each other and reassess. What do I have happening here? And in a case like this, I might decide if I didn't have dots everywhere, I'm going to ask myself, do I want to add? Step 3, eliminate lateral contacts on posterior teeth. 4 is eliminate protrusive contacts on posterior teeth. In other words, slide around in red, tap, tap in the color. If you've got all the dots you want in the back, remove those other colors. I want stripes in the front. That's a mutually protected occlusion. That's what we're looking for. They don't always look perfect because tooth form is not perfect. If we were waxing it, I could give you an ideal tooth form. Step 5, check and smooth the harmony of the anterior guidance. Step 6, adjust postural freedom. In other words, sit the patient up, have them tap. What you see on the right side of your screen often happens. They're a little forward when they tap. Let's create a little space in there so that when they come up, they can hit that surface. That's called freedom in seated condylar position, if that was your reference, or freedom in whatever position you've chosen for all the teeth to hit. Step 7, reevaluate and polish. That's kind of what you do. If you got wax and you can build it, create an occlusion. If you have teeth that hit each other in your mind's eye, design that occlusion and go create it. This is L.D. Pankey. They asked him if he would write a book on occlusion, and he declined. He said, it would be a short book because occlusion is simple. When the jaw is closed, all the teeth touch at the same time. When power is applied, neither teeth nor jaw deflect. In movements away from this fully contacted position, no back tooth hits before, harder than, or after front teeth. Every occlusal design that you can imagine is built into that statement. He said occlusion is simple. Now you must learn when to apply those principles appropriately to each individual patient you have the privilege to serve. It is simple. It is not easy. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you'd like to learn more, please connect with me at Spear Education. We do some fun stuff there around occlusion. In fact, we do fun stuff there around a lot of things. Thank you for listening. I hope you're enjoying 90 Day Dental.
Over the last few days, we've covered a couple of really meaty topics in a very, very concise way. And tomorrow we're going to take it to another level and go into TMJ and muscle analysis just to try and conclude this entire particular section. See you tomorrow.